Palawa Joko was born in the 8th century after Exodus. The son of a prominent Elonian diplomat, Joko is presumed to have had a relatively comfortable childhood, but still had problems nonetheless. As he accompanied his mother on a diplomatic mission to Krita, he began to form what can be best described as a friendship turned eventual rivalry with the young prince of that nation, Oswald Thorn. Thorn had already been showing signs of psychopathy as the two boys engaged in violence against insects together. Thorn had been tearing the wings off of bugs for his own amusement when Joko intervened to teach the young Crichton which creatures could be tortured and still be of use afterwards. Joko suggested that Thorn should redirect his sadism towards his family's servants instead of torturing bugs. In the following days, the two would begin to form a rivalry that started with sneer comments, which then escalated to pranks, which then escalated to violence, a rivalry which would last for centuries. After having returned to Elona, Joko practiced the arts of necromancy. At the age of 17, Joko had killed a fellow student who had challenged his skills by stabbing the student in the back. Afterwards, Joko left his teacher whom he thought he had nothing else to learn from and pursued the arts of necromancy elsewhere in the world. This period of Joko's history is unknown to many scholars, but what the world would soon learn is that Palawa Joko had become incredibly powerful and turned into a Lich, a powerful undead spellcaster. Joko had returned and began to gain power and grow an army for himself. In the year 757 after Exodus, Joko had constructed the Bone Palace within the Desolation. The Desolation is a sulphurous wasteland where only demons and the undead could survive, although he had discovered a way for the living to enter this area unscathed. This is the location for which the human god Abaddon had been defeated by the other gods, and his fall caused the land to warp into this horrible place. Bordering the lands of Elona, Joko began to set his eyes on conquering the entire continent. By the year 860 after Exodus, Joko had grown an army of undead followers, known as the Awakened. He began sending hordes of Awakened into Vabbi, the first step in his path for conquering all of Elona. The king of the land bordering Vabbi and the Desolation resisted Joko's advance, but eventually died. In his place, the prince rose to power and cut a deal with the advancing Lich. Spare his people, and they shall serve Joko. Joko accepted the offer of the young prince, and promptly betrayed him by overrunning the lands and killing everyone in it. The prince was reanimated, and forced to serve Joko as a jester. Joko's armies then began pushing further into Vabbi, claiming victory after victory and adding thousands more to his ranks. The awakened army was eventually able to claim control of the entirety of Vabbi and allowed Joko to subjugate the province. These events devastated the people of Vabbi, and Palawa Joko's actions in the region gave him the nickname of the Scourge of Vabbi. With Vabbi under Joko's control, he began to set his eyes on the rest of Elona. If the different provinces had united and fought against the Lich together, the people of Elona may have had a chance, but the power of Joko and his armies was strong enough to be able to drive back the different armies of Elona, becoming even more powerful with each victory. As Joko claimed more and more land, he subjugated the people living there and raised their dead. Joko proclaimed himself as the king of Elona and began an era of tyranny and oppression. 2 years after he started his campaign into Vabbi, Kurna had crumbled. The army was shattered, and the only remaining force against Joko in these lands was a group of rebels led by a single renegade war marshal, Turai Asa. Turai and the few who were left to follow him were hopelessly outnumbered, but this did not stop their resistance. The rebel group attacked Joko's armies wherever possible and engaged in hit-and-run tactics to try to slow down and trim Joko's armies. But eventually, Turai and his rebels could not stand against the overwhelming might of Palawa Joko and became surrounded at the Grand Cataract of Jahai. Here, Turai Asa and the rebels would make their final stand against the encroaching hordes of Awakened and the Corsair mercenaries whom Joko had recruited. Turai's scouts had learned that the flank of the Awakened army was weak as Joko rushed his forces forward to crush the resistance, and as such, Turai believed that a group might be able to infiltrate their way into the Awakened forces and assassinate the Lich. As Joko's armies met with Turai's, the following battle lasted for days. Neither army gave any ground to the other. Turai's forces stood steadfast in the wake of impossible odds and held their ground to buy time for their leader. War Marshal Turai Asa and a small squad was able to reach Joko's camp. They spied on Joko as he gloated about his power and his impending victory. Here, Turai saw an opportunity to take advantage of the Lich's ego. Turai walked forward and revealed himself to the undead king and his armies, challenging the Lich to a duel. Joko could not deny himself the opportunity to personally defeat the rebel leader and claim victory for himself. The two went to the cliffs above the battlefield and began fighting each other in full view of both of their armies. Sword and shield in hand, Tri stood his ground against the Lich and eventually struck Joko down. The Lich fell from the cliff onto the plains below, being met by broken hordes of awakened and the cheers of the rebel army who had begun to cut down the fleeing undead. However, despite Tri's victory, Joko could not be slain. While the different provinces would be able to repel the undead and begin rebuilding, the threat of Joko remained. Tri's bodyguards dragged Joko to a great tomb and imprisoned him there using powerful magic. Here, they built a large stone plinth to mark the tomb and to commemorate Trios' defeat of the Lich. Afterwards, they formed a new organization known as the Order of Whisperers, who would watch over the tomb to prevent Joko's escape. Joko would lay in this tomb, forgotten and trapped with his own hatred and weakness. As centuries passed, the events of Jahai and the memories of Triasa and the fear of Palawa Joko would live on in the hearts of all Elonians. Centuries later, the descendant of Triasa, Varesh Asa, would begin to rally her own forces and attempt to summon the fallen god Abaddon to bring nightfall to Elona. The destabilization of Kurna and all reality allowed Joko an opportunity to escape from his tomb, where the Lichland fled back towards the desolation. However, Joko was incredibly weak and he had lost much of his power. In his escape, he was captured by the Veldrunner centaurs who held him prisoner.
Did you think you could escape us, Gravewalker? We could follow your stench across the desert.
You are a natural follower, Centaur. Your dead ancestors served as my cavalry.
We did not come to trade insults, Palawa. We want to know how to cross the desolation.
Sorry to disappoint. Only the dead and the demonic can walk the sulfur flats unscathed.
Let me rip his limbs off. He'll still be able to tell us afterwards.
You wouldn't dare, mule.
You're right. Fire is a better way to deal with a lying abomination like you. Someone fetch me a torch.
Don't lie to us, Palawa. The histories speak of mortals at your bone palace. How did they get there?
I did not lie. No mortal can walk the sulfur flats. But there are great worms who travel beneath those sands. These can serve as your steeds, but you have to do one thing.
What's that?
You have to show them you are their master. Otherwise, you're worm food.
The Sunspears, who had allied with the Veldrunner and were working to bring an end to Varesh Asa and Nightfall, bargained with the captured Lich, where the Lich would be granted freedom in turn for information on how to traverse the desolation. Joko accepted the offer and regained control of his bone palace from Varesh's armies with the help of the Sunspears. Joko had regained control of his base of operations, had begun regaining his power, and started rebuilding his armies. In the year 1075 after Exodus, Varesh Asa and Abaddon were eventually defeated and Nightfall was stopped. With the Sunspear Spear Marshal Cormier's ascension to godhood, Joko was jealous of the power she had gained and started growing a hatred towards the Order of the Sunspears. Over the next 2 decades, Joko had regrown his forces similar to that of his previous powers of when he was defeated by Triasa. In the year 1093 after Exodus, Joko began sending raiding parties into the border of Vabbi, emulating much of what he had done centuries prior, taking over land, capturing citizens, and growing his own army. The Vabbian princes did not act against Joko, and the Lich was able to push his forces into Vabbi. The Sunspears had still been weakened by the battles against Varesh Asa and had limited forces. However, they believed that Joko would not leave the desolation and thought him content in those lands. And the Sunspears were wrong. In the wake of Joko's encroaching armies, 2 of the greatest Sunspears, Kos and Lonai, had rallied a small group to journey to the Bone Palace and confront the undead Lich. However, this assault failed as the Sunspears were defeated, and many, including Kos and Lonai, had been turned into awakened by the Lich. In the year 1135 after Exodus, Palawa Joko had grown an army and began a series of events which would destabilize Elona. The Lich began to spread lies across the different provinces of Elona to destabilize the power and to weaken the confidence in the Order of the Sunspears, the biggest defense that Elona had against the Lich. Afterwards, Joko began a full-on invasion of the continent, this time with even more forces and the knowledge of his previous mistakes. Joko dammed and diverted the Elona River, depriving the people of Elona of fresh water to drink and farm with. Joko's awakened burned crops and damaged the soil, preventing the people of Elona from being able to grow food, and Joko placed bounties on the heads of the Sunspears. The people of Elona had been starved and manipulated, and as such they began to hunt the Sunspears to collect the bounties Joko had placed on them. Many Sunspears began to fear the people of Elona who they were sworn to protect, and were enticed by the promise of strength by the Lich. And as such, many Sunspears betrayed others in their order and gave themselves to Joko, becoming the Morden Crescent. The people of Vabbi and Korna were crushed by Joko's armies, which then became provinces within Joko's new empire. Joko moved his forces to Istan and easily took it over, renaming the capital of Istan, Kamadan, as his own, Palawa. By the year 1175 after Exodus, Elona had completely fallen and Joko had taken complete control. The people of Elona were now citizens of Joko's new empire, and the land was for him to rule over. Joko's armies hunted down every centaur in the land, forcing them to extinction, and used their bones to expand his bone palace. In the wake of Joko's invasion, the Sunspears still held some resistance against the Lich, but eventually, Takora, the last spear marshal of the Sunspears, was discovered by Joko. The Lich cut off her tongue and tore out her eyes to prevent her from spreading the messages of rebellion. Takora continued her defiance against the Lich, which eventually forced Joko to kill and awaken her to gain control. But Takora still resisted, being unable to be controlled by the Lich. Joko, surprised, decided to trap her spirit within her immobile body and left her to rot in the cliffs above Vabbi. Joko had taken control of the entire continent of Elona, crushed much of the resistance here, and became a true Lich King. Joko began to establish his dominance on the people of Elona and cultivated a culture of worship towards their new king. Joko had formed a harem with many different men and women of various races. Many grand statues of Joko were constructed around Elona. The remainder of the Asa bloodline were brought before him, and Joko forced them into servitude. And the remaining Sunspears who had not betrayed their nation were forced to travel the land as hermits. Joko began rewriting the history books of Elona, spreading lies to bolster his own fame and strength, forcing the people of Elona to believe in his telling of history and brainwashing the youth to hold an unfaltering faith in the king. Lies like Joko had gifted magic to the races of the world, that he had defeated Asa, and that he had slain Abaddon and taken his power. All places of learning around Elona were heavily monitored by the Awakened, and the spread of accurate information was quickly squashed. With Joko conquering Elona in the Crystal Desert, contact was cut off from the outside world. Only a few Elonians would be able to escape, and only a few Tyrians would be able to find their way into Elona. After centuries, the Lich King Palawa Joko had finally taken control over Elona, and only continued to become more powerful. However, the Sunspears can still be found throughout Elona. While many of the Order Whispers had left Teteria, some still remained, and then many citizens held the ideas of rebellion in their heart. In the year 1330 after Exodus, the human god Balthazar arrived in the Crystal Desert and began to chase the elder dragon Krakatorrik. The chaos by the two powerful forces began to destabilize the land. Many Elonians were able to flee from the grasp of Palawa Joko, as many began a pilgrimage out of Elona, through the Crystal Desert, to the free city of Amnun, and then into lands beyond, such as Kryda. The Krydan government and the Lion's Arch-Captains Council began to form diplomatic relationships with the free city of Amnun, as trade between the two people were established, and many Tyrians began to set forth in the Crystal Desert for the first time in decades. As the commander arrived to Elona to chase after the rogue god Balthazar, it was learned how powerful Joko had become and how far the continent of Elona had fallen into his grasp. Balthazar had met with Palawa Joko to help strengthen his own army by finding souls for his forged. Joko agreed to help Balthazar in exchange for some of the new recruits in order to strengthen his own army. The two then journeyed together and eventually made their way to the Domain of the Lost, where Balthazar betrayed Joko and imprisoned him there, taking all of the souls for himself. The commander eventually found their way to the Domain of the Lost and discovered the captured Joko within.
You there! Come here! Over here! We can help each other. What is your name?
I don't even know who I am. where I am, how I got here.
You died. It happens. Welcome to the domain of the lost. I am, of course, King Palawa Joko.
King Joko? I'm sorry. I don't know that name.
Liar! All who take breath know me. I am King Joko the Inevitable, the last Primeval King, Joko the Undying, the Scourge of Vabbi, Joko the Feared, Joko the Beloved, Joko the eternal monarch of all. How dare you claim to not know who I am?
But you're not a spirit. What are you doing here?
I was deceived by the fallen god Balthazar. I led him here to claim spirits for his army. In exchange, I was promised a share of his new recruits, but he betrayed me and stranded me here instead. Perfidy. From now on, the only god I trust is me.
You are no god. You are an abomination inflicted on the crystal desert like a wound, like a plague.
I am a god. God King of Elona, the crystal desert and all their environs. Genuflect, peasant.
You have no authority here. Only the judge does. He was appointed by Gren, a true god.
Gods, dragons, nations. Soon all will grovel at the feet of Palawa Joko. I knew you'd be back, but I bear no grudges, harbor no ill will. Release me now, and I will still honor the deal you foolishly rejected.
Your help is worthless. I've found my own way back, and I'm off to succeed where you failed, by defeating Balthazar.
Good for you. Such pluck and self-delusion. Off you go, then. Of course, you are forgetting one crucial detail. Balthazar has an army. Do you have an army, little one? Well, I do. An army to rival that of the disgraced god. We both know you don't stand a chance without my awakened soldiers.
You may be right about that. I do need your army, but I don't need you.
What? No. My awakened are loyal to me. They'll never obey anyone but their beloved God King.
Really? Because in your absence, your army obeys the Mordant Crescent. I've seen it, and I can use it.
I warn you, do not leave me here. By royal decree, I forbid it.
Sorry, Your Majesty, but from what I've seen, your kingdom is better off without you.
Come back here, pathetic mortal. This is your last chance. I will return to reclaim my throne. And I will have my revenge on those who put me here, who left me here, and who dare take advantage of my absence. Torture. Oh, yes, I've plotted it out. I will just laugh as their wretched pleas for a longer life turn to desperate cries for a faster death.
Joko attempted to bargain with the pack commander to unify their forces together to defeat Balthazar, but the commander left Joko to his prison and decided that they would take control of the awakened army without the help of Joko, to which they were able to manipulate the generals of the awakened army and launch an assault on Balthazar, killing him. In the aftermath of Balthazar's defeat, Palawa Joko was freed from the domain of the lost and began to plot revenge against the commander. As he returned to his empire, he regathered his forces and continued his campaign of propaganda. As the commander reached Istan, they discovered that the Sun Spears had been recouping their forces and had begun a rebellion on the island province. The commander helped the Sunspears across the domain of Istan and helped destabilize Joko's forces in the province. As this happened, Joko kidnapped a member of the commander's guild, Dragon's Watch. Taimi, an Assuran scientist, was taken by the Awakened and brought to Farinur, the first city of the Primeval Kings. Here, a group of Radanovan Assuran had constructed a lab, but that lab had been taken over by the Awakened. Joko wished to unlock the secrets of what the Ashura learned here and used Taimi to gain access to the systems. Through Ashura gates located in Farinur, Palawa Joko began a full-on invasion on the nations in Central Tyria, sending hordes of Awakened to various lands that the commander and Dragon's Watch call home to claim revenge against the commander and to also spread his influence across the world. The commander was able to infiltrate Farinur and rescue Taimi, defeating Joko's forces there. It would soon be discovered that Farinur was not the only Assuran operation that Joko had taken control of. On the sand-swept isles north of Istan, a large group of Inquest had established Rada Primus. Here, they held more gates that Joko could use to send his forces to Tyria. However, this was not Palawa Joko's primary goal with Rada Primus. He instead sought the Inquest research on the Scarab Plague, an old pestilence that had brought Elona to its knees centuries prior, an illness that could infect any human as scarabs grew inside of their bodies and tore their way out. Palawa Joko hoped to spread the Scarab Plague again across Tyria to bring the people of those nations to their knees. The commander discovered Joko within Rada Primus, but they were too late. Joko had already collected samples of the Scarab Plague.
Joko, you twisted... Stop and face me!
Before unleashing the Scarab Plague on your beloved Tyria, don't you wish? The old me would have drawn this out long enough for you to hear the death screams of Tyrian victims. The new me, on the other hand, better to be sure. Commander Lanai?
Yes, Great One.
Kill them.
As you command.
No!
A small parting gift.
Joko swiftly left with the plague and set the awakened legendary Sunspear Lonai upon the commander. Palawa Joko had returned to Gandhara, the Moon Fortress in southern Kurna. Here he had awakened Inquest work to evolve the plague into an even deadlier form. Gandhara swarmed with awakened as armies patrolled the lands around it. The nearby villages were subjugated and the people obeyed the wills of Joko. However, the pack commander was able to rally the forces of Tyria, as well as a few newfound allies in Elona, to launch an invasion on Kurna. The commander was able to establish a portal deep within southern Kurna, which allowed the various factions to invade the land and establish a foothold. From this foothold, the commander's forces were able to begin fighting back against the Awakened, and help free the Kurnan population and other races around the land. A massive battle waged on between the awakened forces of Gandhara and the invading forces. The commander rallied their troops and began to launch a frontal assault on Gandhara. However, after blowing up the front gates, it was soon discovered that Joko had successfully evolved the Scarab Plague into a third-generation variant. The infected humans were contained by the commander's friends, as well as the ghost army of the primeval queens Dahlia and Nalia, who were the last queens of the primeval dynasty that was ended by the Scarab Plague, and whom the commander had sought for aid in the coming battle. The commander, as well as their ally the Norn Guardian Bram, then began infiltrating the Moon Fortress by entering through the sewer system found on the eastern side of the fortress. Here, they were able to break into Gandhara and begin navigating the twisted halls. Depravity is all that laid before the two. Awakened and traps blocked their way, but the most shocking sight was cages and a torture chamber filled with multiple dead bodies of the commander, tortured and killed by the hands of Palawa Joko. It was soon discovered that they were captured Elonian citizens that were transformed into the image of the commander by illusion magic, but reacted to the actions of Palawa Joko against them as they were once alive. The commander and Bram eventually made their way through the Moon Fortress, defeating one of Joko's generals along the way, and met Palawa Joko face to face, when suddenly...
How disappointing, and honestly unexpected. I thought you would present... Where is he? The commander of the Pact. Hero of blah blah blah, rendered useless by a glorified parlor trick.
Oh, no you don't. Give him one for me, Commander.
I will, Bram. For you. And for Taimi.
That's your ace in the hole. Morons so besotted with you They're willing to sacrifice themselves. Haven't enough people already died for you?
Show yourself, Joko!
With relish. And that's what it's all been about, Commander. You and I, two comets on a collision course. War, plague, gods, dragons. I've seen them all. They come and they go, like the tides. But a worthy nemesis, that is rare indeed.
Cut the monologue. Let's do this.
By all means.
The commander charged in to fight the Lich King. The two strike each other as Palawa Joko summoned minions and taunted the commander. The commander taunted back as they evade the attacks of the Lich and his minions while landing strikes of their own.
A question. Do you love pain as I do? Live this long and sensations lose their savor. One yearns desperately for something that can cut through the ennui. Pain is always piquant. I admit, I've indulged in a few calculated fabrications to bolster my myth. I hoped yours was more than that. Perhaps it is. Oh, look. Your Norn's crying. Why persevere? It's folly. Everyone knows I can't be killed.
I'm thinking maybe that's one of those fabrications calculated to bolster your myth.
I see.
Joko, over the course of centuries, had become incredibly powerful, wielding magics unknown to others, and ruling an empire that rivals that of the Tyrian nations. But the commander, experienced and powerful in their own right, is able to strike the Lich King down.
This cannot be the end.
Whoa, I think you killed him. I mean, I think you really killed him.
Appearances can be deceiving, but...
Look, the Awakened. They're in a stupor. They're not under Joko's command. We won!
Did you? The rumors of my immortality are drastically understated. Oh, Commander, you look so disappointed, so impotent. I feel for you. I really do. But let's be honest. You knew in your heart. Fear not. The world will not forget you. The scars you've gouged into it spell out your name for all to see. I confess I was happy to take credit for your victories. But did you ever stop to wonder what that says about you? That so many bought what I was selling. They call me a monster, and you a hero. The world expects Palawa Joko to dare to throw reality into chaos. But surely, no mortal would be so monumentally stupid as to destroy a dragon, the life force of this world. Let alone two, and a god to boot. Perhaps they will finally thank me for luring you to me. so that I may save the world from you. And once you're gone, everyone will flock to my embrace. They will all love me, Palawa, Ignatius, Joko!
Praise Joko.
As Aurene consumed the magic within Joko and transferred much of his power to herself, the Lich King is dead for good. In the aftermath of the battle for Gandhara, Elona now has a long road ahead of rebuilding with their newfound freedom. After decades of domination and centuries of terror by Palawa Joko, Elona will never have to fear him again, but multiple factions feel entitled to have a seat at the table for ruling Elona and carving out a future for the continent. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this, I have an ever-expanding playlist of Guild Wars 2 lore and story videos which you might enjoy as well. I hope you all are taking good care of yourselves. Have a good one.